What is up, guys? Sean here, and today we're going to talk about the Super Tuesday results and why my predictions were so accurate about the Democratic primary. So Super Tuesday just happened, and the undisputed victor of Super Tuesday is former Vice President Joseph R. Biden. Now, this has come as a shock to a lot of people, especially people in the far left media and in the far left base that support Bernie Sanders, who for some reason thought it was appropriate to assume that Joe Biden's campaign was going absolutely nowhere. However, the ignorance and the surprise was not limited to the progressive left. Right-wing figures like Ben Shapiro did not project Joe Biden doing well early on in this primary process, and the same is true for centrist figures like Tim Pool. However, despite all the naysayers left, right, and center, there was one man, one content creator, on a platform called YouTube who has been saying this entire time that Joe Biden was a serious candidate and this was always going to be a two-person race between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. And that one man, that one ingenious content creator who stood above all of the rest and made his proclamations and stuck with them through thick and thin was me. Seriously, check out this clip from a video that I put together from a video that I put out February 22nd of 2019, aka well over a year before the South Carolina Democratic primary, and see how accurate I was. Where his path to the nomination lies is amongst black voters. Joe Biden is really popular amongst African Americans, especially African American Democrats. He was the vice president for the first African American president in history. He's clearly going to have support from the establishment Democrat wing of the party. And that might not sound important to you and me, but you got to remember that these establishment Democrats, the movers and shakers in the Democratic primary, they might not be able to garner a crazy amount of votes to overcome Bernie Sanders. But what they can do is raise money and essentially discourage people from continuing to run. So Joe Biden's path to the nomination is going to come from his ability to knock certain candidates that eat up his establishment portion of the vote out of the race. Let's say we get through the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire primary, and Bernie Sanders has won both with about 30% of the vote. And you have all these Democratic establishment candidates around 7, 8, 9%. The Democratic establishment is going to put pressure on those candidates to leave because Joe Biden has a better claim to those voters than Bernie Sanders. Like Bernie Sanders, his appeal to white working class voters in a general election makes him really dangerous to Donald Trump. So I can see a situation where Bernie Sanders is in the lead in the primaries early, Joe is trailing behind at second place, and all of the establishment candidates, almost in unison in a coordinated way, get out of the race in order for Biden to have a path to the nomination. Now, that's not just a one-off prediction from over a year ago that I threw out before we knew who was going to be in the race. If you go through my Democratic 2020 primary playlist, which I will have linked in the description box of this video and in the iCard, you can see that at the end of every video, at the end of every debate analysis, I specifically reserve some time at the end of those videos to talk about how I don't think this is going to negatively impact Joe Biden's chances. I talk about how Joe Biden is going to win big in South Carolina. Now the question is, why was I so accurate while everyone else seemed to be missing the boat on this? Now the obvious answer to that question is that I, Sean Fitzgerald, owner and content creator for this YouTube channel, just happen to be smarter than every other person covering politics at this very moment. And that's true, undeniably true, but that's not the reason why I was so accurate while these people were so wrong.
No, you haven't. You're a lying dog-faced pony soldier. You said you were.
The reason why I always knew and always kept reminding you that Joe Biden was a legitimate candidate is because I looked at the 2016 data, I looked at where Hillary Clinton was strong and where Bernie Sanders was weak, and I saw that Joe Biden had a similar level of strength in the same areas that Hillary Clinton did, and Bernie Sanders had not done much to make inroads in those communities. And what I'm talking about specifically is black Democratic Southern voters, who I've been saying this entire time matter immeasurably in the Democratic primary, and Joe Biden was always polling incredibly high with them. Even when Biden was fading in the national polls down to like 8% in one of the outlier polls, he still had around 39% black support in the Democratic primary. In the Southern Democratic states, 2/3 of the electorate are black voters. Because Joe Biden may be the person that I get the most heat for, because for some reason, despite the fact that he's been holding that lead in the polls since he entered the race, there's a lot of people who believe that his support somehow doesn't count for whatever reason. And I've given the same exact reasons why Joe Biden is a serious candidate, and every single time you guys give me, well, he doesn't talk good and he misremembers things. And of course, there's the most important thing that is attributable to Joe Biden that people can't overlook, and that's the fact that he has significantly higher poll numbers among black voters than any other candidate. And considering the way that the Democratic primaries are structured, that after Iowa and New Hampshire, you start going through the Deep South where the majority of the voters are black, that's going to give Biden a huge lead from the jump. And nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, has started eating into Biden's black support. And no matter how you slice the numbers, no matter that Pete Buttigieg overperformed expectations in Iowa and Amy Klobuchar overperformed expectations in New Hampshire, nobody throughout the course of this entire primary started to cut into Joe Biden's Southern black support. Therefore, Joe Biden was the inevitable candidate to run against Bernie Sanders throughout this election. If your strategy during this Democratic primary was anything but getting Southern black Democrats to vote for you, then you had no chance of competing with Bernie Sanders. That was true a year ago when I made my initial prediction, and it's been true throughout this entire process, and it will prove to be true as Joe Biden continues to climb over Bernie Sanders. So not only was I right over a year ago about this race inevitably funneling into a two-person race between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, but 49 days before Super Tuesday, I put out a video where I broke down something related to the Democratic primary, and I chose this as my thumbnail. As you can see, in big, bold letters, I put the final four, and the final four candidates are Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, and Michael Bloomberg. Which candidates did not drop out by Super Tuesday that were actually competitive for some delegates according to polling? Joe Biden, Michael Bloomberg, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren. Now, at the time I put out this video, and at the time I chose that thumbnail, everyone was obsessed with Pete Buttigieg. Everybody was talking about how this young man from Indiana was surging in the polls. So, in order to make this thumbnail, I actually had to superimpose an image of Michael Bloomberg over Pete Buttigieg because I wanted a picture with most of the candidates that I thought were relevant. That's how confident I was in my assessment. I literally looked at photos of who other people were saying were the final four candidates and replaced one that I thought was completely irrelevant with Michael Bloomberg.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
Now, in the aftermath of Super Tuesday, Michael Bloomberg actually decided to suspend his campaign and throw his support behind Joe Biden, so you can really see the establishment coalescing around Joe Biden to put him forward to eventually wrestle the nomination away from Bernie Sanders. But we're going to talk about that and Elizabeth Warren staying in the race a little bit later in this video. I want to go into the numbers and talk about just how big Joe Biden's victory was compared to what was projected for him. Now, if you look at the Real Clear Politics polling average for the Super Tuesday states, you can see when you compare it to the final results that Joe Biden completely overperformed in every single state that he was on the ballot. Even states that he lost, he got a larger share of the percentage, aka a larger share of the delegates going forward. And a perfect example of this was a state like Virginia, where Joe Biden was projected to win at about 42%, but he ended up walking away with 53% of the vote, which means that Joe Biden overperformed that average by 11%. Now, by contrast, Bernie Sanders performed either exactly as expected or slightly below expectations according to the RCP average. Joe Biden, even if you look at these averages, actually overperformed in a lot of these states the outlier high poll number for him. Now, while Biden overperforming the polls in states that he was already expected to win or states that he was already expected to be competitive in is a sign of life and strength in his campaign, the fact that Biden overperformed in states that he was expected to lose is devastating for the Sanders campaign. And there are 3 states, but really 2 states that are super indicative of Biden's strength throughout this campaign. Obviously, Texas was going to be a big win for Bernie Sanders if he could get it, but Joe Biden wrestled that away by performing 5 points higher than expected in that state. But the other states that Bernie Sanders should have had a lock on, or at least finish a solid second behind somebody else on, are Maine and Massachusetts. Now, the results for Maine are not in, and statistically, it's something that we would consider a tie, even though Joe Biden is technically, at the time of me filming this video, in the lead in terms of vote count in Maine. That was a state Sanders was supposed to win overwhelmingly, and Joe Biden wasn't even supposed to be that competitive in. However, it looks like Joe Biden is going to inch out that victory over Sanders. However, that's not the worst one. Massachusetts was a state that Biden was projected to finish third in. Sanders was actually projected in the late polls to win the state of Massachusetts, ahead of Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, and then Biden was supposed to come in at a comfortable third, but pretty distant from the second place winner in that race. However, Biden leapfrogged both Sanders and Warren to finish first in Massachusetts, and decisively so. Joe Biden finished nearly 8 points ahead of what he was projected by the RCP average in the state of Massachusetts. And considering that's a state that Joe Biden barely spent any time and or money in fact, I believe he didn't even visit Massachusetts once because it was just assumed that it would be a Warren state and if not a Bernie state. That's devastating for the Sanders campaign and for the Elizabeth Warren campaign, who just got embarrassed by finishing third in her home state. But again, Massachusetts shows the same pattern that we've seen across the board in all the Super Tuesday states. Biden overperforming the polls, while Sanders performs almost exactly like he was projected to do.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
Alright, let's talk about the aftermath. Now, as you guys already know, Bloomberg dropped out of the race. I said it earlier in the video, and I'm torn because I can't stand Bloomberg. He's literally my personally most hated candidate, but at the same time, he was flooding social media, including this YouTube channel, according to the comments that I received, with ads, and I do appreciate all the money that Michael Bloomberg ended up indirectly putting into my pocket through Google, so I am sad about that. But even more devastating than Michael Bloomberg getting out of the race to clear a path for Joe Biden, who's in the same lane as him, Elizabeth Warren has decided that despite the fact that she finished in third place in her home state, which is an embarrassing loss that often causes people to drop out, that she's going to stay in the race. And in fact, she sent out an email as the results were coming in, asking people for more money, indicating that she wants to stay in till the next week, where there are more states on the ballot in a not as big a Super Tuesday type event. Now, Sanders supporters are livid at the fact that Elizabeth Warren, who is in the same lane as Bernie Sanders, whose base of support says that they will go to Bernie after Warren, has decided to remain in the race and not clear the progressive lane for Bernie. But they shouldn't be surprised that Warren is doing that, because I believe that Warren is being insanely strategic and trying to secure for herself a vice presidential position in the Joe Biden administration. Now look, I don't have the time to break down all of the philosophy laid out in the book Rules for Rulers, but essentially the key component that fits in perfectly with the scenario that we're in right now is that on your way to pursue power, you need to get keys to power on your side in order to get and maintain your position. And typically, the people who are the keys to power that get the biggest rewards for switching over to your side are the people who switch over to your side last, because usually they have the biggest thing to offer you in order to gain favor in your new administration. Essentially, the calculus for Elizabeth Warren and her team, according to my speculation, is that she was going to stay in the race in Super Tuesday to see how well Bernie Sanders would do. If Bernie Sanders had an overwhelming decisive victory in Super Tuesday states, then Elizabeth Warren likely would have dropped out, thrown her support behind Bernie Sanders, and tried to get the VP slot from Bernie. However, if Joe Biden turned out to be the winner, or it turned out to be a split, then Warren would hang around knowing that she's damaging Bernie Sanders, under the premise that Joe Biden would promise her the VP slot or some other high-level position. I just think it's the VP slot because it seems like that's what she would probably get from Bernie Sanders, so she's trying to set herself up in such a way that she could get that from Joe Biden as well. Look, as fun as it is to make fun of Elizabeth Warren and her political strategy and her campaign and her life and all the lies that she told, she's not a stupid lady, or at least she's not that stupid of a lady. She has to know that her hanging around in the race is negatively impacting Bernie Sanders, who she allegedly considers her dear, dear friend. Yet she's doing it anyway. She has to know that after losing your home state, you're basically dead in the water as a candidate. However, she's hanging around in the race anyway. Warren is doing this on purpose, and there has to be a reason why she's doing it on purpose, especially since Warren has shown that she is more easily influenced by the Democratic Party establishment than Bernie Sanders and other candidates. So if the Democratic Party establishment has been in contact with Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and other Democratic Party candidates in this race, urging them to drop out and endorse Joe Biden so that everybody can consolidate around Joe Biden, you think that they're not influencing Warren's decision to stay in the race, even though she clearly has no chance at winning the nomination? Look, there's a lot of things that the Bernie Sanders people say and do that shows their complete disconnection from reality, their level of delusion, but one of the things that they got exactly right was the fact that Elizabeth Warren is a snake. She is clearly positioning herself at the expense of Bernie Sanders to get some kind of powerful position in a potential Joe Biden administration. It's open, it's transparent, and it's clear that she does not care about the progressive movement as much as she cares about her own personal political future. So while I always maintain that Joe Biden was a good candidate to go up against Bernie Sanders, and he had a pretty good chance to beat Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primaries, what Elizabeth Warren is doing is all but assuring Joe Biden's victory, and she knows exactly that that is the outcome her actions will likely lead to. But those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on all my social medias. You can support me and my amazing predictions via one-time donations on Venmo or PayPal, or monthly on Patreon or Subscribestar. This has been me celebrating the fact that I've been right this entire time and telling you what's going to happen next. Till next time.